There has never been TV like the eagerly awaited war drama. It's unlike anything we've seen on the small screen. The first installment of this quasi-trilogy of Second World War productions from executive producers Gary Goetzman, Tom Hanks, and Steven Spielberg, Band of Brothers, irrevocably altered television and ushered in a period of high-profile drama. Even while The Pacific did not take off quite as quickly, it received high praise from critics and was the recipient of numerous accolades. Masters of the Air, a 9-part epic based on Donald L. Miller's 2007 book Masters of the Air. America's Bomber Boys, Who Fought the Air War Against Nazi Germany, premieres 14 years after that series and 23 years after Band of Brothers. It centers on the exploits of the U.S. Air Force's 100th Bomb Group, known as the Bloody 100th due to the large number of deaths they incurred. African-American fighter and bomber pilots Tuskegee Airmen are also featured. It is also one of the best, most jaw-dropping dramas you are going to see in a very long time, much like its predecessors. The much-anticipated premiere of Apple TV Plus's World War II drama series Masters of the Air is absolutely spectacular. The 100th Bomb Group's air crewmen are first introduced to fans in Season 1, Episode 1, simply titled Part 1, as they set off on their first mission of the war. This thrilling premiere effectively establishes the tone for the entire miniseries and tells viewers precisely what to expect from this gritty program. Major John Bucky Egan spends his final night of freedom in 1943 before taking off the next day, marking the start of Part 1. He enjoys going out with his ladies and his best friend, Major Gale Buck Cleven. Gale talks about how Bucky earned his peculiar nickname while reliving their initial training together. With the hope that they will cross paths once more, the two pals bid each other farewell. In stark contrast to this surreal introduction, on his first mission over Germany, Bucky witnesses the new realities of war. As enemy jets assault and overwhelm Bucky's troops, the plane crashes hard toward the earth. They are able to put out the fire in their aircraft and survive. Once back at base, Bucky is instructed not to tell his fellow soldiers about the impending atrocities of the war and to keep the atrocities a secret. We rejoin the 100th Bomb Group as they go to England and the war after the grand opening title sequence. Along the route, Gale and his group make a detour in Greenland before traveling to Britain to join Bucky's gang. After that, more of the cast is introduced to the audience, and Gale is kept informed about Bucky's inebriated antics. They call his acquaintance a troublemaker. The next scene shows Bucky having a drink that same evening in England. His drinking habit is beginning to spiral out of control. After refueling, the group departs for Britain. But during the voyage, one of the planes becomes lost. Due to his frequent vomiting fits and battle with air sickness, Navigator Crosby unintentionally leads the team to France in the war. They also manage to escape unscathed, although Crosby suffers from tremendous embarrassment due to his detour and is taunted for his errors at the base. Reunited with Gale, Bucky greets the gang as they arrive in England. After their incident, Crosby's plane takes a bit longer to arrive. They also have trouble landing, so they have to make a crash landing back at the base. Pilot Brady takes over for Crosby during this tense arrival, but the Navigator receives a warning in private. If he wants to stay in the Air Force for a very long time, he needs to solve his air sickness issue. Gale and the group were called in for their first operation a few days later. After coughing up blood in private, Colonel Harold Huglin briefs them on their first mission. They have been ordered to bomb Bremen, Germany's U-boats. Major Bill Veal will command the 349th Squadron, while Gale will pilot the 350th. They are advised that they are going to enter the center of the activity. As the crew gets ready for takeoff, they are anxious and superstitious. Lieutenant Curtis Biddick, Barry Keoghan, who is seated next to Gale on his first mission, is introduced to us. They immediately head out, but poor vision causes them to become lost very quickly. As a result, early on in their journey towards Germany, two planes almost collide. This indicates that once they enter German airspace, their formation is a complete jumble because of the dense cloud cover. Even worse, Veal's jet has engine issues, so they have to return to base before they can join the fight. One of the 19 planes has already gone down. Subsequently, the German attack commences, with thick flak bursts surrounding them. They start to suffer hits as the shots get closer and closer. Colonel Huglin cancels the mission because they are unable to see their objectives because of the clouds. When the Germans come in their own fighter aircraft, the real fighting starts. During this combat, 3 American planes are struck and lost. The surviving aircraft make their way back to base without dropping any bombs on the enemy. Huglin gets off his jet back at the base, coughs up more blood and falls. After his first expedition, Gale is in total disbelief. After assessing the significant harm done to his aircraft, he meets up with Bucky again. Why didn't Bucky warn Gale about the brutality of war? Bucky acknowledges that he was at a loss for words. Gale already appears to be broken. On that first trip, they lost 30 soldiers, and they accomplished nothing at all. The first chapter of Masters of the Air ends with this unsettling truth, summarizing what comes next. Part 2 of Masters of the Air focuses on Major Gale Cleven's second mission, leading the 100th Bomb Group on a targeted daylight bombing raid in Norway. Even more character development and increased suspense are present in Season 1, Episode 2, which centers on a second, highly dramatic airfight. The debriefing following the team's first mission is where we begin. The air crew members talk about their unsuccessful mission's general turmoil and the poor visibility conditions. After this incident, many people are hurt or dead. Colonel Hudlin is also out of commission due to a burst ulcer, which explains why he was coughing up so much blood. Bosser and Richard also have frostbite. That evening, Bucky becomes somewhat inebriated while reflecting about the guys they lost in the initial conflict. When Bucky's colleague becomes inebriated, Kurt concerns about his mental health. Bucky urges him to strike him in the face, confirming his fears. Bucky encounters Neil Chick Harding, the new colonel, a few hours later, still inebriated from the early morning drinking binge. The new colonel demotes him right away. After Bucky and Gale have breakfast, they decide to write letters to the families of people who lost loved ones as a result of the first mission's failure. 3 weeks later, the planes are being fixed by the ground crew in preparation for their upcoming mission. The 19-year-old leader of the ground team, Ken Lemons, who is portrayed by Jude Law's son Raph Law, Twist, is briefly introduced to us. A plane crashes not far from where Ken is talking to the local children. It turns out that this was a botched rehearsal mission. 66 men remain from their original 350 starters. While they wait for replacements, the 100th Bomb Group must continue its operations. The Americans end up intoxicated in a local British bar that evening. Bombing during the day is pure suicide, the British advise them. They don't understand why the Americans would battle during the day since they had been effectively bombing at night for the entire war. An altercation and a fistfight outside the bar follow this debate. Before the evening is out, Kurt defeats his British opponent. After that, the squad is informed of a second mission and proceeds to their briefing. A group of submarines off the coast of Norway is their next target. Regretfully, Navigator Bubbles is sick, so Crosby has to step in at the last minute. Despite his continued self-consciousness following his most recent flight, Crosby takes up the responsibility. The turbulence causes Crosby to throw up again not long into the second trip, and the organization of the squadron is horribly incorrect once more. With their primary objective in sight, the 100th Bomb Group is targeted by gunfire shortly off the coast of Norway. 2 of Kurt's engines sustain damage when his jet is struck. He acknowledges that they are leaving the operation early because they are unable to keep up with the rest of the formation. The group unleashes bombs on their targets, but Bucky vows they won't give up on Kurt and his misbehaving aircraft. Shortly after, the Americans come under fire from the enemy and are involved in another intense aerial combat. Nevertheless, they manage to repel these assailants, and Crosby arranges for Kurt and the group to take a different path. Just as the Scottish coastline is coming into view, Kurt's plane loses a third engine. Kurt, however, is able to save himself and the crew by making an emergency landing on the edge of the cliff. Unharmed, the other jets return to their base in England. Despite the Navigator's constant vomiting during the trip, Bucky is impressed with Crosby's abilities. That evening, they all celebrate with music and dancing. During the celebrations, Bucky even tries his hand at singing. During the celebration, Kurt gives Bucky and Gale a call to express his gratitude for not deserting him in his time of need. For now, his crew is secure in Scotland. An end to Part 2 is a bike race in the base. Early on, Gale takes the lead as the crewmen put wagers. But in a hilarious pileup, every contender falls from their bike, ending the race. The air raid sirens then begin to wail. When bombs drop close by, they are compelled to go to their bunkers. As they watch the bombs crash in the distance, Gale tells Bucky that his father was an alcoholic and a gambler, feeling introspective and shockingly vulnerable for a change. This, in Bucky's opinion, explains Gale's dislike of sports. Then Gale admits to Bucky that he agrees with the British that dropping bombs during the day is a suicidal mission. However, they both acknowledge that in any situation they have to take the lead for their team. They just need to lead from the front. It is not their position to question their commands.